Egypt. The fall. Of the living gods. The greatest civilization of the ancient world rises from a vast desert. As all-powerful kings build magnificent empires through the sweat and blood of their loyal subjects. New religions evolve as great pharaohs create stunning temples to celebrate their lives and amazing monuments to enjoy after their death. These gods on earth vie for power in violent struggles in distant lands and within the walls of their own palaces. Ancient Egypt has left sphinxes and pyramids, tombs and treasures. Its majesty has long entranced archaeologists and historians. Now, cutting-edge research and dramatic new discoveries reveal tales of conspiracy, betrayal, murder, and vengeance. Egypt. Splendor and treachery. Next on Empire Games. A new pharaoh named Akhenaten took the throne around 1353 BCE. Akhenaten completely reshaped the core religion of the entire court and country of Egypt.
Amenhotep IV, or Akhenaten as he would later on more famously become known, is regarded as perhaps the most controversial Egyptian king. Yet that has mainly to do with his religious policies.
His reign began in the capital of Thebes, and at first, his policies seemed to be aligned with his father's traditional principles. There appeared to be no reason to change.
The first years of his reign were pretty much unremarkable, and he used to do what every other Egyptian king had done before him. But after a couple of years, in his 5th year, he changed his name from Amenhotep to Akhenaten and elevated the sun disk Aten to the most important deity of New Kingdom Egypt. Up to then, it was the god Amun who had been the most important New Kingdom deity. Amenhotep means Amun is pleased or satisfied. But later on, he changed his name to Akhenaten, or Akhenaten, which means beneficial to the Aten.
Akhenaten decided he needed greater power and enhanced legacy. He believed he and his beautiful queen Nefertiti should be worshipped as divine beings. Nefertiti became one of the most famous women in ancient Egypt.
She was the great royal wife of Akhenaten. We don't know her family background, but it seems reasonable to assume that she must have been a daughter of one of the prominent noble families of the time. During her time as Akhenaten's consort, she became elevated in an unprecedented way, so that she became in some ways almost equal to the king.
Egypt during the early 14th century BC was the most powerful kingdom in the Near East. For 2 centuries, the pharaohs of the 18th dynasty had expanded the empire's frontiers. Their armies returned with riches and slaves.
What Akhenaten tried to do was placing himself as the Egyptian king and his immediate royal family as some kind of mediator between the sun god Aten and the wider Egyptian population. So by abolishing greater part of the Egyptian pantheon, he would ensure that the population would have to go through him and the royal family to appeal to the sun god. Possibly, for whatever reason, Akhenaten had the feeling that the Egyptian king was not as powerful as he should be.
In traditional Egyptian religion, the king was basically a being who was at the same time human and god, and thus played the role as a mediator to the gods. And this idea is emphasized even more strongly in Akhenaten's religion. Their connection is even closer, as he's in some senses a manifestation of the god. He's the first human being, in a sense, created by the sun. It's not just the king that focuses on, but it's actually the royal couple as the first manifestation and almost the incarnation of the divine power inherent in the solar disk.
At first, he continued in the tradition of his ancestors, building structures dedicated to the god Amun at the Karnak temple complex at Thebes. But then, the work in honor of Amun suddenly stopped. He constructed a completely new temple east of Karnak. Unlike his father's temple at Luxor, the new temple was not dedicated to Amun. His temple was intended for the worship of the solar disk, Aten. The new temples were decorated with colossal statues of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. The statues in the new Aten temple depict Akhenaten with a long spindly body and slits for eyes. It's believed this is to give him a more unworldly, godly appearance.
The Egyptians tried to align everything on a square-based grid and worked from then on. Now that changed in the Amarna age with Akhenaten. He turned the squares into rectangulars. Hence you end up with elongated features. Why he chose this artistic representation has to do with communication. The idea is, how do you communicate that you are radically different from anything that came before? How do you communicate that to the wider Egyptian population, which is mostly unable to read or write? And I think we have to look in the visual sphere here. You choose a different visual style, a different style of representation to communicate that you are very different.
Queen Nefertiti is also depicted in new ways.
She is depicted not with the traditional Egyptian queen's headdress, which is in the shape of a vulture, but rather with this famous round crown that is so characteristic of her. One of the reasons that she might have wanted to avoid the vulture headdress is that it's connected very clearly to the goddess Mut, basically marks the queen as an equivalent or an analog to the goddess Mut. And the goddess Mut, as the consort of the solar god Amun-Re, was one of the gods that Akhenaten was really interested in rethinking and actually had removed from a number of monuments. So along with Amun-Re, Mut was also erased in a number of cases. So it would no doubt have been inappropriate for his queen to assimilate herself to that role.
Akhenaten then makes a further outrageous decision and decides to move the entire capital to a new city he will build 500 miles north of Thebes, Al-Armana.
He needed to leave Thebes to make clear that he represented a clear break from earlier Egyptian traditions.
One of the things about El Amarna is that it was in the middle of nowhere. It was not dedicated to any other god, so there was no other worship going on at that place. And this is precisely what he didn't have in Thebes, where there were all these centuries-old structures that were already created a particular system and particular ways of worshipping the sun god, whereas by taking it to the desert, he could create a new city from scratch and worship the sun god in precisely the way that he thought was proper.
The construction project is hugely ambitious, but Akhenaten marshals the resources of the entire country to complete the new city with enormous speed. Tens of thousands of ordinary people, as well as the entire royal court, were moved to Al-Amarna.
Considering that he basically built a city from scratch, it did happen quite fast. The resulting city was very much centered on the palace and the temples to the Aten. It's very clear and very much in keeping with his reasons for building this city in the first place that the absolutely most central thing was the worship of the sun god. And
Clay tablets found at the Al-Amarna site give a rare glimpse into the life and diplomatic policies of Akhenaten's reign. Far more insightful information than the typical grandiose engravings of temple reliefs. The daily ritual is carried out in virtually the same manner every day. The king leaves his palace, then enters the great temple through the gateway and finds before him the great central altar covered in offerings. When he moves from his palace to the temple, he goes by chariot. Why? Because the king hardly ever touches the ground, even though the ground at Amarna is sacred. It's been walked on by ordinary people and is therefore impure. Only the ground of the palace and temple were considered to be pure. On the balcony of the palace, Akhenaten and Nefertiti would often present themselves to their subjects in their role as living gods. We also know that Akhenaten had an extensive harem of royal women from other countries who were sent to Egypt to become wives of the pharaoh. One named Kia appeared to have developed a special relationship with Akhenaten, leading to some form of rivalry.
Kia was a secondary wife of Akhenaten, and it's quite possible, as in a number of similar cases, that there would have been some kind of rivalry.
So it seems as though there was some kind of arrangement with two different residences for the two families. But Nefertiti was the first lady, as well as the royal wife, and she had one main advantage. She was considered a living goddess, and their 6 daughters were considered divine as well.
What we do know is that Kia disappears at a certain point in Akhenaten's reign, and we don't hear any more about her. That has been taken to indicate that she fell out of favor. Well, she may also have died though.
By 12 years into Akhenaten's reign, he was all-powerful. He had no significant opponents in Egypt, and other countries came to offer tribute to the great king. But then, events took a dark turn for the reign of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. In the year 1339 BCE, Pharaoh Akhenaten and his queen Nefertiti are at the height of their power. They have attempted to reshape Egypt's religion with them as living gods, and they've moved their capital to their newly built city of Al-Amarna. But Akhenaten's attention had been focused on setting up his new religion and royal capital, and he has neglected diplomatic affairs. A powerful kingdom in central Turkey called the Hittites seized the nearby state of Mitanni, a key ally of the Egyptians, eroding some of the pharaoh's power. Then, to make matters worse, the royal family is struck by sudden tragedy. something kills the king's mother and 3 of their 6 daughters.
We know that Akhenaten's daughter Akhenaten died in year 14 of his reign, because that's depicted in the royal tomb, so we see that scene. It's striking that a number of the other royal women disappear from the records between year 12 and year 15 of Akhenaten's reign. And so it's been theorized that perhaps there was a plague of some sort that meant that all of these women were dying.
This was horrible news for Akhenaten and Nefertiti, a tragic loss for the family, but it is also viewed as a bad omen for the new Aten religion. Priests are quick to dismiss the new cult and return to their prior beliefs, and most of the king's subjects have never embraced the new faith.
Hence, the impact of his reign is probably rather to be seen in terms of theology, of internal Egyptian developments. But even if we talk about internal Egyptian developments, that raises the question in what way the wider Egyptian population was actually affected by these reforms, or whether there was not simply an internal matter within the Egyptian elite.
The political and personal difficulties are severe setbacks for the pharaoh's reign. Then the final blow: the death of his queen Nefertiti. The records indicate that Nefertiti died before Akhenaten. This threw his new cult into turmoil. He'd never determined how his religion would deal with death. It was all predicated on having a king and queen as gods. But now there was no queen. Everything fell apart. It wasn't long after that, in just the 17th year of his reign, Akhenaten himself passed away. Without the living gods, the focus of the religion was completely gone. Soon, the entire cult fell apart. Just 3 years after Akhenaten's death, the royal capital was moved back to Thebes, and the temples of Amun were reopened. But some changes from the heretic pharaoh lived on.
You would get much more of an emphasis on people's personal relationship to gods. This seems to be an effect of the Amarna period, or the Amarna religion, and the way in which the sun god had become more accessible in a sense, because it was just the visible god. It was not a god who was worshipped inside a dark shrine, only accessed by specialized priests, but you could actually see the god.
For centuries, pharaohs etched their life stories into stone on an epic scale. They create monuments to secure their legacy and please the gods. They build fantastic tombs to safeguard their place in the afterlife.
The king was basically a semi-divine being. He wasn't an ordinary human who just happened to have a lot of power. He was actually a special kind of being closely related to the gods. And so what that meant was that, in a sense, he was just a visitor on earth, and he needed to return to his divine origin when he died. And that's very much the purpose of building these tombs, is to secure safe journey back to his divine origin of the king.
Before the pharaohs started building pyramids, kings were buried in a squat, angular structure called mastabas. These are low rectangular buildings with angled sides. Then an early Old Kingdom pharaoh named Djoser demands a taller, more impressive tomb. He insists on piercing the sky, being closer to the gods. Djoser is the most famous king of Egypt's 3rd dynasty. Contemporary sources refer to him as the divine of body. He is an autocratic ruler who craves wealth and power. Djoser sees his territory as far south as Aswan and dispatches troops to exploit the minerals of the Sinai Peninsula. Copper and turquoise are riches brought back to his court. The pharaoh also sends emissaries deep into the Egyptian countryside to enlist young men to work on his grand pyramid project. The laborers are sent by ship to become part of a giant construction crew. Some toil in vast stone quarries, others on the pyramid itself. Djoser certainly exerts absolute power over his subjects. The question remains as to whether these laborers are actually the pharaoh's slaves.
While they were probably not slaves in the modern European sense of the word, that they were private property of another person, it would be a stretch to say that they were voluntarily engaging in this project. So the truth may lie in the middle, that they were some kind of unfree laborers, but not in the sense of slavery.
Djoser's project starts with a huge mastaba. Then, in a brilliant innovation, he stacks one mastaba on top of another, 6 in all, until a pyramid shape emerges. This innovation is considered so spectacular that Djoser's architect, Imhotep, is eventually revered as an Egyptian god. Djoser's historic structure is called the Stepped Pyramid. Dating back to Egypt's Old Kingdom, around 2650 BCE, it stands as the first monumental stone building in human history. Pyramids now become national symbols of the supremacy of the kingdom. No expense is spared to create these magnificent monuments, even if it means the cities and the subjects live in relative poverty. The pharaohs have become gods on earth, and the pyramids are their stairways to heaven. These colossal structures represent the power of the kings to bring order to Kemet.
Connected to Kemet was the concept of Ma'at, which in Egyptian meant order in the sense of a cosmological order, truth or justice. And according to Egyptian ideology, Ma'at was opposed to Isfet, which came to represent chaos, evil. And Kemet was the land of Ma'at. So the king's most important and basically only task of his reign to ensure that Ma'at, the realm of order, prevailed over the realm of Isfet, of evil, of chaos.
Each succeeding pharaoh feels a need to reassert their supremacy with monuments that exceed anything that came before their reign.
One of the ideological aspects connected to Egyptian kingship was the idea that the current king had to surpass his predecessor, both architecturally and in terms of foreign policy.
When Djoser's descendant Snefru takes the throne, he immediately sets out to surpass the achievements of his legendary ancestor.
Snefru was the first king of the 4th dynasty, who's mostly known for his pyramid building. He was the most avid pyramid builder of the Old Kingdom. Beyond that, he also imported cedar wood from Lebanon. And according to Egyptian annals, he also waged war against groups in Libya and Nubia, taking several thousands of captives in the process and also their livestock.
Snefru uses the cedar wood to build huge sailing ships as well as barges to transport giant blocks of stone for his pyramid projects. For his pyramid at Meidum, Snefru demands an advanced design, a pyramid with perfectly straight, smooth sides. His monument begins as a tall, stepped pyramid. Then the steps are filled in with limestone casing stones to create smooth sides. But at some point, the outer stones must have crumbled. All that remains is the inner core. Egyptologists aren't sure if it fell during his lifetime, but something prompted Snefru to construct a second pyramid a few miles south at Djoser. But this new pyramid starts out at an angle of about 54 degrees. But cracks in the burial chamber cause engineers to adjust the angle to 43 degrees for the remainder of the project, giving the pyramid this odd shape and a fitting name, the Bent Pyramid. Even though this pyramid has a change in angle, the surviving structure makes it clear that Snefru is again attempting to construct a smooth, straight-sided pyramid. Snefru builds two giant pyramids, but the evidence suggests he still isn't satisfied. He constructs a third monument with the entire pyramid at 43 degrees, the same angle as the corrected top section of the Bent Pyramid. The result is the magnificent Red Pyramid, a flawless, straight-sided pyramid. Why was he obsessed with perfecting the pyramid shape we now associate with ancient Egypt? Was there a motivation beyond architectural excellence? Or did it have religious significance? Evidence shows that the pyramid shape may have represented the rays of the sun. And in ancient Egypt, the sun equals life itself. The sun god was believed to die and be reborn every day. The king was considered to be the offspring of the sun god, and his dead body was also thought to be reborn every day. Pyramids, stone representations of the sun and its power, were the mechanism for his rebirth. So for the Egyptian kings, the stakes were extremely high. They wanted a perfect pyramid to guarantee that this sacred daily cycle would continue. Snefru's descendants reached even higher in their quest for this eternal life. King Snefru's impressive pyramid projects clearly demonstrate his immense power, administration, and organization. He sets the stage for the next king, his son, Khufu, to build an even grander monument. In 2580 BCE, Khufu chooses a spot in Giza, just outside of Cairo, for his Great Pyramid. Khufu's vizier, Hemiunu, is believed to be the architect of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Hemiunu was a cousin of Khufu and one of the most important members of the court and responsible for all the royal work projects. To accomplish their goals, a giant quarry is built about 1/2 mile away from the pyramid, and a huge ramp is constructed to haul the stones up to the site. Another ramp runs down to the Nile. For some 16 years, 1,000 tons of stone was quarried, cut, and dragged up these ramps every day. Periodically, Khufu and Hemiunu review the progress of the pyramid from a high overlook. 25,000 men working in sweltering heat for a common goal, a glorious burial chamber. Khufu is obsessed with his project and will stop at nothing to get it done. He ruthlessly bleeds his country dry to fund his mortuary complex and pyramid. He even goes as far as prostituting his own daughter in exchange for stone for his pyramid.
We don't really know what life for the workers was like. What we do know about these specific workers is that they had bakeries, they had their own living quarters, they had physicians that took care of injuries that probably occurred during the construction process. They had a production chain where staple foods were produced that was needed during the construction of the pyramid. But beyond that, we don't really know what life was like. And we shouldn't see this necessarily as evidence that they were voluntary workers, that they were free in their decisions, that they came there by their own will. We also don't really know how these workers were selected, how they were drafted by the Egyptian king, or whether there was a draft system.
In 2560 BCE, after 20 years of construction, the Great Pyramid was complete. It must have been an unimaginable sight. In 2566 BCE, Khufu is entombed for all eternity in his Great Pyramid of Giza. For centuries, the ancient pharaohs carved their life stories into their monumental structures. The etchings immortalize the great prowess and achievements of the kings. The stories that we find on the walls are sometimes just self-aggrandizing propaganda. One of the most obvious examples of this is the reign of Ramesses III. Ramesses III comes to power in 1184 BCE. He starts at a disadvantage. He takes the throne at an early age, long before he expects to be king. He probably wasn't particularly prepared to be king. He'd been a young military officer when his father Ramesses II died prematurely, so he might have been prepared to lead armies, but not ready to reign. He also faces additional pressure, having to carry on the Ramses name. Ramses III is expected to live up to the legacy of perhaps the greatest pharaoh Egypt had ever known. Ramses the Great ruled gloriously for 67 years.
One of the most striking things about Ramses III is how eager he was to emulate his great predecessor, Ramses II. Ramses II was an extremely successful pharaoh by any Egyptian standards, and he built monuments all over Egypt and fought relatively successful wars and so on. And Ramses III was very intent on copying this highly successful reign.
He hopes to be remembered as a king who showered great glory on Egypt, tales he has painted on the walls of Medinet Habu.
Medinet Habu was the mortuary temple of Ramesses III, and it's basically the place where the cult to the ruler was performed. It also included a residential area for the king. He would reside in the residential part of Medinet Habu. And the reason that it's important in this particular story is that he also had quarters for his harem there.
Images inscribed on the walls show great military victories with the pharaoh in the heart of the action. But the reality of the reign of Ramses III is a very different story. At this time, the whole Near East is undergoing major political change, and Ramses III is the man who must deal with it.
This is the end of the Bronze Age, which was a time of tremendous upheavals. There was a large migration of people of different origins, but they were known collectively as the Sea People, who swept across the Eastern Mediterranean and caused a lot of chaos, a lot of trouble for the rulers of the empires there, including Egypt.
During the reign of Ramesses III, the Libyans, a perennial enemy of Egypt, launched frequent raids into the Egyptian territory. As a desert people, they covet the fertile land.
According to his own inscriptions that he put on temple walls, he was able to win massive victories against the Libyans, and he took many prisoners, took much cattle from the Libyans. We should keep in mind, though, that you more or less had to say that you were successful when you put up military inscriptions in your temple. It wouldn't do to say, well, okay, this time it didn't go so well, and I failed, and I lost this many men, and so on. You couldn't put that on your temple wall.
The records show that Ramses was never able to defeat all his enemies, and he might have felt insecure. The statues he's built of himself are inscribed with magical spells.
Most, if not all, Egyptian rulers would have used things that to us seem like magic, in part because they didn't make the distinction between magic and religion that we do, and also not between magic and medicine. In the same way, from what we know of Egyptian healing and Egyptian rituals for protection of the body and so on, they very often mixed elements that we would think of as medical, like drinking a particular potion or doing something else, and then things that we would classify as magic, so rituals and spoken incantations and so on.
Ramses hopes these spells will help him act as a lion to drive off demons and defend the citizens of Egypt. Yet even worse than personal insecurity and military weakness, Ramses' court is infected with an atmosphere of suspicion, intrigue, conspiracy, and murder. Pharaoh Ramses III builds impressive monuments to celebrate his glorious reign, but documents written at the time reveal that he is a troubled and insecure ruler. The walls of his Medinet Habu temple are covered with stories of his great military triumphs. But what is missing on the walls of the temple are clues that something highly unusual is happening at the court of Ramses III. His palace is filled with dissent, scandal, and conspiracy. Much of the trouble emanated from his harem. Like all pharaohs, Ramses has a large harem with many wives and many royal children.
There must have been many women in Ramses III's life, but it's interesting that the official inscriptions and his representations of them seem slightly less interested in this aspect than some of his predecessors. So much of our evidence of who they were and what their names were and what their roles were and so on is slightly indirect. It doesn't come from his own inscriptions.
It isn't clear which woman was designated as his chief queen. This is a key role, as she is the person who joins him in his association with gods. This great royal wife is also the mother of the next king, with her eldest son, likely to become the heir to the throne. Without this clear choice, conflicts arise between various women jockeying for power.
There is a great royal wife who is depicted and identified as such in Ramses' own inscriptions, but he doesn't give her name, so we don't actually know which of his wives this is. We do know that the Lady Isis has the title in her own tomb, but she's buried much later, and so it's not clear when she was appointed as the great royal wife. And this has been taken to indicate some kind of indecision, that he wasn't actually sure who he was going to make his great royal wife. There is a statue of the Lady Isis and Ramses together, in which she is designated as the great royal wife. So she certainly did have that role during the reign of Ramses III.
Other inscriptions indicate there is another powerful woman competing for Ramses' favor. Her name is Tsi, and she leads a conspiracy against the pharaoh.
There definitely was a Harem Conspiracy against Ramses III. One of Ramses III's wives, a lady called Tai, was part of the royal harem, and she had a son, Pentawerid, whom she wanted to succeed Ramesses III as king. And the conspiracy basically consisted in enlisting a number of people inside the harem in the first instance, but also outside through relations. One of the harem ladies got her brother, who was in the army, to support the conspiracy. And so a number of people were involved in this plot to replace Ramesses III. And of course, it isn't said directly in the legal documents that record this case, but the way to replace a king would be to kill him.
Inscriptions indicate Pentawerid is actually the eldest son of Isis, and Ramses is probably his father. C will stop at nothing to install her son on the throne.
So the motivation of Tai is fairly clear. Obviously, she would become an extremely powerful woman by being the mother of the future king. A number of harem ladies were involved who gave their support and knew about the plans that Tai was making. And they supported this plan and helped get assistance from outside the harem and so on. It's not clear that they would have much personally to gain, though of course, if they were successful, it couldn't hurt their position to have helped the new king become king in such a dramatic way.
C puts together a group of conspirators to get her son on the throne. This is a good time to launch the murder scheme. Ramses is unaware of the plot because his attention is on a huge festival he's planning to celebrate himself. He also appears to be facing great economic challenges in the kingdom.
The people who were working on the royal tomb, which was a large prestige project, of course, for any pharaoh, were not paid their wages, and so they refused to work until their wages were paid.
This is considered the first labor strike in history.
This being such a prestigious project, one would expect that he had given it high priority and given high priority to paying out the wages. So the fact that apparently this was not possible probably shows that we had really immense economic problems in Egypt at that time.
Now, Ramses is under siege from within his realm, while conspirators plot to end his life and install a new ruler. C and the conspirators decide to use the crowds and frenzy of Pharaoh's celebration at Thebes as a diversion to assassinate the king. They also use magic to aid their cause.
Magic was definitely involved. We can tell from the court transcript detailing the judgment that was held over the conspirators that part of the accusation was that they had appropriated magical writings from the library of the king. It seems especially that the magic was directed against the harem guards and was to make it possible to get messages in and out of the harem in the first instance. We also learn of waxen images of gods, and also potions were made. And these were smuggled into the harem. They were prepared on the outside according to the instructions found in the king's library. And then they were smuggled inside, and they were activated in whatever way they needed to be activated. So these wax images would have been used as a kind of voodoo dolls to attack and weaken the guards in the harem. And the potions, we don't learn what exactly their nature was, but again, they were presumably meant to be slipped to the guards to make it easier for the conspirators to carry out their plot.
C and the conspirators set the murder plot in motion. For centuries, history is uncertain about all the details.
For a long time, it was unclear because the texts do not make it clear what actually happened, whether the king survived the attack or not. And the earlier examinations of the king's mummy had said that there were no signs of violence on the body, so either they wouldn't have been successful and the king had lived on and died of natural causes later on, or they would have been successful but had used something like poison. However, recently the mummy was re-examined using CT scans, and it now became apparent that he actually has a deep cut in his throat, showing that he would have died that way. It's a cut that he would have been very unlikely to survive. So he was in fact murdered by having his throat cut.
They murder Ramses, clearing the way for Pentaworit to become king. But in the end, their plot fails. To the conspirators' shock, their coup is turned back. The murderers are caught, and Ramses IV, the son of Isis, takes over after all. Most of the conspirators are condemned to death, including Pentaworit, who's forced to kill himself. Others are punished by having their ears and noses cut off. Thi disappears from the records, but it's assumed she is condemned to death as well. Ramses IV acts quickly to prove he is worthy, but the Egyptian empire is in steep decline. The reign of the great kings would never be the same, and despite his shortcomings, Ramses III is remembered as the last great pharaoh of ancient Egypt. For 3,000 years, the Egyptian empire stood as the world's greatest civilization. Their dazzling contributions to architecture, technology, art, science, and medicine endure today as landmark achievements. Their great kings and queens ruled as some of the most complex, bold, and intriguing figures in history. And their religious beliefs, obsession with the afterlife, continue to fascinate the modern world. The pharaohs, their courts, and people of ancient Egypt leave a captivating legacy of splendor, treachery, and empire games.